Welcome to week 4 at Mpai 600 here at Georgetown University. Just a couple of things, announcements. Please follow the directions from the YouTube videos. I sent some about last week's discussion. Not everyone followed it. You're going to lose points on that. So I don't do these videos for my own edification. So please follow the directions on what I say here. And finally, Capitol Hill Terrain Walk again. Reminder, November 6th at 8 p.m. We've got a good people who wanted to go or attend via Zoom. So I look forward to that. And I will let you do your final paper, not the paper coming up, but the paper at the end of the course on the Capitol Hill Terrain Walk or Capitol Hill Intelligence Failure, January 6th Intelligence Failure, if you attend, only if you attend. So be cognizant of that as well. So paper one, most people have gotten their collection strategies back. Let me just kind of hit the highlights. Again, requirements are way too broad. I mean, I'm threats to businesses is way too broad. Will China invade Taiwan is way too broad. That could be narrowed down to something like this. The China have the capabilities that China would employ for an air and missile blockade over Taiwan. What is the impact of fentanyls is way too broad. Those are some of the ones that I got, and I'm again, you have to narrow it down. And you got to imagine, again, I'm writing this, or when I talk about this, obviously AI and intelligence is becoming a big issue. The collection plan will be much more important because you will have to give the AI much more guidance if they want to collect information. And giving the artificial intelligence describe all fentanyl trafficking is going to be a little bit too broad. You have to really narrow it down if you have these automated systems. So just keep that in mind going forward. And then a couple issues. A lot of people talked about policy. I say that to give an example, many of you said, does my company's antivirus prevent ransomware threats against my facility? That's good, but it's a policy base. You want to turn that around to say, what is the ransomware threat that can get initial access into my company's systems? So very nuanced between the two, but you don't want to evaluate your own policy because you're kind of putting the horse before the cart. You want to say what the threat is, and then your requirements and your policies should flow from that. And a lot of people talked about social media. I just want to give a heads up again. Social media is great in some cases, early parts of the Russia conflict. If you want to examine right-wing extremism in the United States, social media exploitation can assist with that. However, again, it's not a panacea for all issues. Social media wouldn't be very well against North Korea. Social media exploitation would be good against something like MS-13 or 14th Street Gang, because they tend to rely on actual in-person networks to in-person networks to recruit and to radicalize. So just keep that in mind, again, going forward. And I think I've got most people's collection strategies back. If you haven't gotten back, you'll get it back shortly this coming week. So week 3 review. Again, we had the Pearl Harbor case study and the Yom Kippur case study. Just a couple of issues with the Pearl Harbor case study. So there's kind of multiple schools of failure. Why was there a failure at Pearl Harbor or any other intelligence failure? So the first argument is the traditional school, and this argues is that the analysts were overwhelmed with information, and you don't know what the critical information is until after the fact. You can see this in kind of the Pearl Harbor case study, where there was all this data, all this information collected, but you didn't know the important parts of it until after the fact. And this school comes, again, it was developed by a woman named Roberta Wallstetter, who was one of our earlier nuclear strategists. And her argument when looking back at Pearl Harbor or in the nuclear age, is that we wouldn't know that we would be under a nuclear attack until after the fact. We wouldn't know those indicators or what the important indicators were until after a nuclear exchange, and by then it doesn't matter because we'd all be a smoking parking lot. So this was the argument. It was also made at the beginning of the computer age, where we could collect a lot more data, and analysts, that would be great, but analysts would be overwhelmed with the data. They wouldn't know the key information points, and they wouldn't know how to go about it. You can make this argument, speaking of January 6th, about the Capitol Hill January 6th incident. After the fact, people pointed to all these open source intelligence. How did you not know that this guy wanted to attack the Capitol? And how did you not know what this issue was? Well, that is all great, but that's easy to identify after the fact. Before, those posts were made in a slew of hundreds of posts and hundreds of social media documents and blog posts, so it's hard to tell what's important. So that's the traditional school. The second school is the reformist school, and this argues that we did have enough information, but it wasn't shared with the right people at the right time. This argument is made by the descendants of Admiral Kimmel, and there's some merit here that information was collected about Pearl Harbor in the D.C. area by the D.C.-based intelligence groups, but it was not shared with the people on the ground that can make a difference. You will see this when we talk about 9/11. You could see this when we talk about January 6th again, and this is what the Capitol Police have made the argument, is that there was information collected by the FBI and Homeland Security, but it wasn't shared with the Capitol Police that could have actually made a difference. So this is the reformist school. Then there's the contrarian school. This argues no, there wasn't enough information collected, or the right information collected. We weren't overwhelmed with information, we just didn't have enough. And there's arguments on this school as well regarding Pearl Harbor, and this is we didn't know the location of the Japanese aircraft carriers, their most critical asset. And we didn't know where they were until bombs started to fall on Pearl Harbor. So, you can make that argument as well with Pearl Harbor. Then you have the Dahl thesis. He argues that it wasn't information or collection or requirements, but things fell down when you were trying to convey data to policymakers. And he argues that the information wasn't receptive enough because the data wasn't tactical enough. And as you read the comparisons between Pearl Harbor and Midway, and in order to get the information, you need to be more focused in your analysis and more tactical, so it's more receptive to policymakers. Not a bad thesis. This is a pretty good, I think, a decent argument. But I would just argue again, you rarely get the tactical data that you need to make decisions or get very specific decisions. There is no, on 9/11, there's no data point that says, okay, 4 people are going to hijack this flight at 8 a.m. and 3 people are going to hijack this flight going to D.C. at 10 a.m. And that information doesn't exist. For those of you who've been to Iraq and Afghanistan, there's no intelligence that says the IED is going to be implanted in this location, at this grid coordinate, this intersection, by this person at this time. That one piece of data that tells you all that doesn't exist. Intelligence is about kind of putting together disparate information points to arrive at a conclusion. And what that comes down to is the Sharma school. It's not really the Sharma school. I'm just kind of being tongue-in-cheek here, but the Sharma school says that there has to be enough intelligence so that operations or policymakers can make reasonable risk reduction circumstances. What do I mean by that? So again, in Pearl Harbor, I would argue that there was enough information, even without the intelligence, about the declining diplomatic issues and the potential war with Japan, that the commanders on the ground could have made reasonable actions, whether that's cancel Sunday leaves, extend air patrols, types of issues that would have prevented a Pearl Harbor. You can make that with the January 6th. Again, we'll talk about this more next week. But arguably, there was enough information out there in the space without the intelligence that the Capitol Hill police should have made reasonable risk mitigation. Additional fencing, calling in more people, pre-positioning riot gear that might have mitigated January 6th. So again, the reasonable part's the important part to think about. For the Pearl Harbor case study, you're not going to send the fleet out based on those indicators or something along those lines, but you can do certain countermeasures that would have mitigated risk. So then the Yom Kippur War, again, over-reliance on a human single source, Norwan, as you all saw in the reading, addiction to preconceived notions, the concept that they believe that Israel would not be attacked by Egypt unless Egypt could mitigate Israel's air force with surface missiles or more aircraft. That kind of were in the back of the minds of several military commanders. And then lack of kind of an intelligence assessment. What I mean by that is, the Israelis were looking tank to tank, plane to plane. We're superior. There is no way that the Egyptians would try and attack us. What they didn't look at was surface-to-air missile to plane or anti-tank missile to tank. Those kind of asymmetries that gave Egypt certain advantages that Israel was blind to. And because we talked about the Yom Kippur War, obviously the October 7th incident, now Yom Kippur War was initially the greatest intel failure in Israeli's history, but I think the October 7th might be another case going forward. So I want you, when you think about October 7th, start thinking, as there's more data coming out, think about what school of failure did it occur? What combination of school? How could the Israelis have mitigated that, even with if they had any information? And what did Hamas use to mask Israeli or their plans from the supposedly vaunted Israeli intelligence services? So as we go week 4 preview, I'll be honest, there's a lot of work here. So with the compressed schedule, I know it's going to be a lot, but you just kind of power through it here. Iraq, the 2 case studies, Iraq WMD and 9/11. Kind of history for probably most of you, but it's obviously, I lived through them growing up. So Iraq WMD, you had the Rachel Maddow documentary. Again, just take it with a grain of salt. She's a political commentator, but I think the documentary is accurate in the way it's portrayed. You have the 60 Minutes, the curveball. Again, another 15-minute documentary. You have the Iraq WMD committee report. It is 200 pages. Do not read 200 pages. Do not read 200 pages. You'll see blue boxes in the committee report. Just read those blue boxes, and if there's more detail that you think is important, you could go in more depth from those blue boxes. But I want you to just hit the high points of the committee report. And then you have my lectures and the discussion board. And then 9/11, you have the 2 documentaries, lots of documentaries this week, National Geographic, Nova NSA, and then the readings from the DAL, and then my lectures. So if there's any questions or issues, let me know, and I will get back to you on the grading for the discussion for the collection strategy. And if there's any issues, please let me know.